Good morning, everyone. My name is Russ Visser, and I'd like to welcome you to the first day of SafeStart training. Prior to getting started, we need to take care of a few basic housekeeping items. The first is the emergency exits. If you go out the double doors at the back of the room, when you leave the room, those doors, take an immediate right, go down the corridor until you see the double glass doors, and that'll exit you out onto a patio at the back of the building. The second set of exits would be out the double doors behind me to my right. Once again, go out those doors, take an immediate right down the corridor. When you get to the double glass doors, if you exit through those, that'll also put you on a patio at the front of the building near the entrance of the parking lot. Should anyone need to use the ladies' room or men's room in the next couple minutes or days, once again, go out the double doors, go across the lobby, and you'll see them over there. Also in this lobby area out there is where we'll be having a buffet-style lunch at around noon today. A couple other items about the room. If you look on the wall on my left-hand side, you'll see a long table which has refreshment items. There's coffee, tea, water, juice, and soft drinks. There's also an assortment of fruits and looks like bagels and sweet rolls. And then at the back you'll see some additional tables and racks. What's back there is additional SafeStart material, and there's also some examples of the course that we have in different languages. The last thing we have on our list is cell phones. We realize that you're all very busy individuals, and it's not realistic to expect that you would be able to, unplug yourself from the outside world for hours or days at a time. So what we do request is, if you take your cell phones, if we can put those to silent vibrate. If a call does come in, feel free to answer the call in this room. And then if you could proceed to one of the exit doors, go outside, finish your phone call. When you're done, come on back inside. So a little bit more about today's agenda. I'll be handling the introduction in Unit 1. That'll take approximately 2.5 hours, so we should be wrapping it up sometime around 9:30, quarter to 10. At the end of that, we'll take a 15-minute break, at which time when we come back, Mary Thompson, who's in the back, can you give us a wave back there, Mary? She's going to be doing Unit 2. That'll take approximately 2 hours, so we should be wrapping up around noon with her presentation. At that point in time, like I mentioned before, we'll have a 1-hour buffet lunch. Go ahead, go out there and eat the lunch, which should be pretty tasty, and then just try and relax or catch up and rest your brain, because we'll have given you quite a bit of information over the next few hours. When we come in around 1 o'clock, Fred Smith, who's also in the back, if you can give us a wave, Fred, he's going to kind of lead you through the procedures and strategies to roll out SafeStart into your workplace. So, next thing I'd like to do is give you a little bit of history or background on myself. Once again, like I said, my name is Russ Visser. I've been in the construction engineering industry for about 38 years now. I originally started out as an electrician at age 19. I started my own construction company at 25. At 27, I sold the company and used the proceeds to go back to university. And at age 30, I graduated with an electrical engineering degree. In the subsequent 27 years, I've been involved in the engineering industry. Primarily, I've been involved in field type work, and a lot of my work has been either directly with employers, but a large portion of it's been actually as a consultant. And as part of my consulting business, I've had to visit numerous different customers' facilities in different industries, such as I've worked in the petrochemical industry, I've worked in oil and gas, I've worked in food manufacturing, I've done some mining work, I've worked in different alternative energy type things. So I've been in numerous different facilities. And over that time, like I said, a lot of requirements in order to get in the facilities was I had to be safety trained. And sometimes that was only just a quick 2-hour course. One case in a mining company I worked up in the Northwest Territories, I actually spent 3 days doing that. And that included everything from learning how to, avoid being attacked by wild animals out in the bush, to how to properly use a fire extinguisher. So in those years, I've had training pretty much in things like WMIS and material safety data sheets. I've had training with Scott air packs, so I could use those in either confined spaces or high hydrogen H2S environments. I've had procedures on proper lockout, things about how to report injuries, where you go for first aid and safety. So, really the common thing that is all throughout it, it's been basically rules and regulations that have been mandated by either industry themselves or by governments. And really up until the time I ran up against SafeStart, I've never really had any training that dealt with what I would call kind of behavioral modification, methods that we can use to change our behavior that will make us be safer and trying to prevent a lot of the injuries that happen to us. So my original exposure to SafeStart happened in about November of 2011. I have 3 sons who've been in the skiing sport for freestyle skiing sport for years, and we went down to Colorado early November for an early season kind of training for them to get prepared for the competitive season. And we were down there with 11 other athletes, a coach, and 2 other parents who were chaperones, including myself. And one of those parents we were down there with was a man named Larry Wilson, who you'll meet later in the presentation. He's the primary author of SafeStart, and also one of the principals of the company. It's a family-owned business. He's one of the sons of the original founder, and he's been there pretty much from day one. So over this 3-week period that Larry and I were together, we got a chance to get to know each other, and kind of both of us talked about what we did for a living. And he gave me some explanation of what SafeStart was, and I found it pretty interesting. He'd also mentioned that from time to time they hire people to come on as consultants or direct employees to do presentations and training. And I thought, well, that might be interesting at some point in time. So we left, and sometime in early 2012, SafeStart decided they were going to sponsor the BC Freestyle Ski Association. And as part of that sponsorship program, what they did in the spring of 2012, they took 25 to 30 members of the BC Freestyle Ski Association teams, and they actually ran them through a 2-day complete training program. And I happened to have 2 sons who were both on the BC Park and Pipe team, so they had the opportunity to sit through that program. So my oldest, when they came home, I just happened to ask him, he was 17 at the time, I said, well, Hunter, what did you think about this training program? And what he came back with was, he said, well, it was very interesting. I found it entertaining, and he said, I also really learned some good tools and techniques to kind of take situations in life and analyze them and then change my behavior, so it made me safer. And I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. And he jokingly said, he says, really, it's almost ruined my life. And I said, well, what do you mean about that? And he goes, well, he says, now I look at situations that I normally just would have ignored. And he said, I'm finding myself that everything I do, I analyzed what I could do to change my behavior to make it safer. So, him talking about this and his interest in it kind of really, piqued my interest. And, what I'm going to show you is a couple of videos about what he considers a normal day. And I think once you see those, you'll probably get an understanding why I thought this was quite interesting, that he thought a safety training thing was, was something he was interested in. So this first video is on a day when things are going well for him. And this next video is when things don't go so well after all. So you can imagine why my ears perked up after seeing a kid who considers that to be a normal daily activity, expresses that he found a safety training program both interesting and informative. So at that point in time, I decided, well, I think I need to, look into this a little bit further. So I recontacted Larry Wilson and said, I'm still interested in potentially doing something with you. What do we need to move forward? And he said, well, normally what we do is we get you to go to a 3-day train the training seminar, which gives, you a chance to check out what you think about it. And it gives us a chance to kind of look at you and see if we think you're a potential candidate. So the next thing we did is in November of 2012, I attended a Train the Trainer seminar in Edmonton, Alberta. And I also myself found it a very interesting experience. And really one of the common threads that I kept seeing throughout the presentations over the days I was there through the different presenters, was almost every one of them at some point in time in their presentation expressed the fact that no matter if they've been there only a year or 10 years, that consistently in their experience, somebody would come up to them and say, you made a huge difference in my life. And I thought, to me that would just really turn on a light bulb, and I thought, if I could have a job where I could truly make a difference in people's lives, that would be something that I've been kind of looking for all my life. And I have to say that having been in the engineering field for 27 years, I often leave a project, feeling good about the project, but I would, really have to be hard pressed to say that at any point in time I really feel like I've made a huge difference in somebody's life. So the other the other thread that kind of ran through the whole program was people who were presenting kept kind of giving these common sense kind of tips that could really be used in your normal and incorporated normal day life to enhance them and make them safer. Kind of a case in point was it was on the second day. One of the presenters sort of was telling the story about how he was on a 4-lane highway. He was in the left-hand lane traveling probably 70, 75 miles an hour, and he decided he wanted to change back to the right-hand lane. He said, I did all the things right. He said, I looked up in the rearview mirror to see if there was a car, He said, I looked over here to my side view mirror to see if, I saw a car. He said, I even did a shoulder check to turn around and see if there's a car. He said, I saw nothing. He said, I go to change lanes, and he says, I just about clipped some guy who happened to be in my blind spot. And he thought, what I need to do something to change this. And what he came up with was what he does now is every time he gets ready to change lanes, he turns on his turn signal, and he waits approximately 3 seconds before he changes lanes. And he said he's never had a problem in 6 years since then with a close call. And I thought to myself, well, that seems like a pretty common sense, easy thing to do. And so since then, I've actually incorporated that into my life also. And even though it's been a short period of time, it's now an ingrained, I don't think about it. I just basically go to change lanes, and I don't specifically sit there and count to 3, but I wait long enough. It's probably close to 3 seconds before I change lanes. And so, what I'm trying to kind of point out is that, over the next couple of days, that's really what SafeStart's all about. SafeStart's about giving you tools and techniques to modify your behavior so you can make your life safer and basically enhance your life. So, I guess what we should get into now a little bit is sort of what SafeStart is and isn't about. First of all, this course isn't about replacing anything that you currently do in safety. We want you to still continue to do what you're doing, make no modifications to it. The second thing is the SafeStart concepts can be applied everywhere to reduce injuries. This includes work, it includes at home, it's in the community, and it's particularly useful on the road where there's a much more incidence of high energy potential dangerous situations that we're up against every day. So in the back of your folder, you're going to find this SafeStart card, and really this is kind of really one of the basic concepts about SafeStart. Is we've identified these 4 states, which are rushing, frustration, fatigue, and complacency. That when you fall into one of these states, what happens is it causes you to make one or more of these critical errors, which could be mind not on task, eyes not on task, stepping in the line of fire, or a balance, traction, or grip issue. And once you start making one of these critical errors, what it does is it starts to elevate and increase your potential for a risk or an injury. So, just a quick show of hands. Did anybody here on the way to work see somebody rushing? Of course we did, certainly did. I mean, if you're on the highway, I'm sure you saw people speeding along over the speed limit, or changing lanes, trying to get around people, maybe honking horns. Typically just in a hurry to get to work. Another question: anybody in the crowd either is presently married or has been married in the past? Then I suspect none of you know anything about frustration, do you? Yeah, I mean that's kind of a line that we use, all over North America, around the world in different languages, and it usually fails never to get some kind of a response. So, moving on, SafeStart's being used by over 2,000 companies in over 40 countries, and it's been proven to reduce the injury rate by 50% or more. SafeStart is not about rules, disciplines, or procedures. SafeStart is non-political, and SafeStart is currently available in over 25 languages. However, the only goal of SafeStart is to help each of us prevent the errors and mistakes we never wanted to make in the first place. So, one thing that you're going to see moving forward in the next couple of days, and which is really central to the SafeStart training experience, is what we call the SafeStart story. And in fact, later on in this presentation, you're going to see Larry Wilson, who is the author and one of the principals of the company, and he's going to have a whole section explaining how you construct a SafeStart story and the different components, the 4 components that make a good SafeStart story. And so what we're going to kind of look into next is we're going to start to realize that we all have these kind of common occurrences that happen to us, and one of those areas happens to be slips and trips and falls. So I'd like to just share kind of a quick story about myself that happened to me around a slip. And what I'm trying to, what happens usually when you have a slip and a trip and a fall is usually it's a non-consequential thing. You slip, you fall, you get embarrassed, people laugh. But that isn't always the case. And so what my story kind of shows is that about 5 years ago, I was back in Quebec City with 2 of my sons who were participating in a Canadian freestyle junior national ski competition. And we were back there at a ski hole we'd never been to called Les Relais. And what you have to realize about the 3 sons of mine that I have is that they've all grown up skiing in British Columbia. And British Columbia probably arguably has, if not the best, maybe some of the best terrain and some of the most difficult terrain, not only in North America, but in the world. And so we can tend to be a little bit you know, condescending sometimes when we go to eastern ski hills and we look at what, you know, they consider difficult runs. And so, you know, on this day, we're going to stay on the top of a ski run looking down on a black diamond run, which is one of the more difficult ones. And we're kind of looking at that, kind of laughing, thinking, you know, if we would have been in BC, this would have been maybe a green run, or at the worst a black, I mean a blue. And so, you know, we take off down the hill, and, you know, and skiing down, and we get down to the bottom, and at the bottom of this run, it opens up into a big flat area. And to my right is a 6-passenger ski lift going back up the hill, a chairlift. And what they've done is they put these different lineups or queues for people to get into based on whether there's 6 people, or 4, or 3, or 2, or 1. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to group the people efficiently together so they can maximize the amount of people to get in the chairlift. Well, above these lines or queues are basically signs in French, because we're in Quebec, that explain, you know, which line you're supposed to go into. Well, unfortunately, I don't speak any French. So I'm coming down to the bottom of this hill. I'm not moving very quickly on my skis anymore. In fact, I'm kind of doing like this kind of slow turn, kind of looking, you know, towards these lineups. So I've completely taken my eyes off what I should be looking at, which is skiing. I'm not really thinking about skiing anymore. In fact, what I'm doing, I'm looking over here as I ski this way, and I'm looking at these lineups, trying to figure out which one I should be in. And I'm looking at these signs up here, trying to basically, you know, decipher what they mean with my limited amount of French. And as I'm doing that, I catch a ski edge, this one over here, and I slam myself, and in particular my left shoulder, into the hard packed snow. Well, I'm laying on the ground, and I'm embarrassed. I mean, I look like some guy who just learned how to ski, when in fact I've been doing this since I've been 12. And I get up and I, you know, brush myself off and get the snow off me, and I kind of realize that my shoulder hurts. You know, well, it wasn't enough to make me stop for the day, but the reality is, when we got home, I later went to physiotherapy, and it took me probably between 6 and 9 months to get that shoulder healed to the point where it didn't hurt every day. And to this day still, I can hit it the wrong way and it still hurts. So I guess what I'm trying to, you know, explain is that, you know, we have these common occurrences that most times there's no consequences to. Like I said, you fall down, you get embarrassed, people laugh at you. But sometimes it actually can be worse. So what we'd like to look at next is just kind of some videos on slips and clips. I think it was originally maybe something off America's Funniest Home Videos. But, you know, take a look at it. It's pretty entertaining. So, SafeStart is about the accidents and injuries that happen to all of us, our family and our friends. We all have basically common, you know, occurrences, and I'd like to see a show of hands from people to see if anybody's ever had any of these happen to them. How many people have had banged their shin? Okay, pretty much everybody, right? How many people have stubbed your toe? How many people have dropped something on your foot? So let's have another show of hands of those people who've dropped something on their foot. How many of those people out there, has that resulted in either a cut or a broken bone? Okay, so there's probably about 100 people in this audience, and I see 15 or 20 people. So obviously, sometimes these simple common occurrences that, you know, wouldn't cause any troubles can actually elevate to a higher risk situation, can't they? Sort of like my slip that I had. So how about, you know, how many people have fallen down the stairs before? You've not seen a stoplight or red light. Falling asleep at the wheel, or almost falling asleep at the wheel, turning or bumping into something, or standing up and banging your head on something, hitting a hand with a hammer. I mean, I seem to be, every time I pick up a hammer to do a construction project, it seems like my fingers turn to thumbs. Cutting yourself with a knife, scissor, or razor, burning hand, arm, or wrist, spraining ankle, knee, wrist, or thumb, straining back, neck, or shoulders, or falling into something or onto something hard or sharp. You know, for me, one of my earliest experiences in life of having an injury that I remember was probably when I was maybe 5 to 6 years old, and my mother would take me to a friend of hers house, and I was being your kind of typical rambunctious 5 or 6 year old, probably running around the house making lots of noise, and her intention was to have a visit. So I remember the two ladies kind of, you know, suggesting maybe I go out on the back patio and go out in the backyard and play a little bit so they could have some time to talk. And I'm an admitted fanatical barbecuer. I mean, I love to barbecue, and I'm one of these guys who only uses charcoal. I don't use like a gas barbecue grill. And I don't know if when my fascination with barbecuing started, but maybe it was around this time. But I remember going out to these people's back patio and looking down, and I saw this barbecue grill. And this, what you have to remember is this would have been 1961, 62, and this grill was made out of steel. And back in those days, anything that was made out of steel was made out of lots of steel. So I suspect this grill probably weighed, 5 to 10 pounds, big heavy duty thing, which never would have worn out. And it was unique in the fact that it was a double grill that was kind of hidden. So I'm playing with this grill, and somehow the bottom part unhinges and it falls down and hits my big toe, right in the middle of the big toe. So I'm sure, I probably went back in the house, was, screaming and crying, and my mom finally got me calmed down. They took my shoe off, and they looked at, took my sock off, and looked down at my toe, and it's not cut, but it's, got this huge, big black and blue blood blister underneath the toenail. So, once they got me calmed down, then what my mom pointed out to me was, well, what you need to realize, Russ, is that probably in, a couple weeks that your toenail is going to fall off. And I was like, oh, so that, at first it was a little bit scary to think about. Well, then after that, I'm 5, 6 years old. I was absolutely fascinated. So every morning I'd get up, and the first thing I'd do is I'd check my toenail and see how I was doing. And sure enough, in, I don't know, maybe 2 to 3 weeks, it finally fell off. It was this kind of shriveled up, black and blue looking kind of thing. And I used to have at that age this kind of souvenir box, and that went into my souvenir box and probably stayed there for I don't know how many years. It was just, a thing of fascination for me. So, once again, these things that can be sometimes minor occurrences can actually elevate into more serious injuries. So, if you kind of look at traditionally what safety is looked into, it's really been rules and regulations and people who are taking deliberate risks to, in situations about not doing that. And as you can see here, these guys are obviously taking deliberate risks. To put a forklift on top of another forklift to lift a device is a pretty risky situation. And I'm sure if a safety inspector came through and saw this, this would probably result in pretty hefty fines. But if you take a little closer look in this, you'll start to see that actually quite a bit of forethought went into this to reduce the amount of risk. And in this case, you have this guy kind of in this tan shirt and this, fairly heavy tire on the back of this Toyota pickup truck. And more than likely what that's designed to be is a counterbalance. As the weight out front gets pushed towards here, that Toyota pickup or forklifts go on a tip, so the guy basically leans back and kind of balances it out. The other one you can kind of look at is this guy in the middle right here. Besides lifting this part of the forklift up and down, I'm sure he's probably working as, he's communicating between these guys, because this guy probably can't see very well. So, he's been kind of put there to kind of try and eliminate the risk. So, really looking at this, probably the biggest violation that I can see that we have is the guy who's got his sandals on. He doesn't have his steel-toed boots, does he? But, just because the industry wasn't, really talking about the human errors that can happen, it was more, around rules and regulations, it doesn't mean that the human errors that we cause weren't important. And so, unlike this situation, the previous one was a deliberate risk. I don't really think that any of this was actually deliberate. Now, it's quite possible that maybe this guy had done something to really irritate him, but more than likely what it was due to some kind of human error. Somebody wasn't paying attention, somebody was, didn't have their eyes on the task, mind on the task. And like I said, even if industry wasn't talking about human error, it doesn't mean it wasn't important. In fact, I don't know if the guy walked away from this, but I suspect for him, that would have been the most important thing on his day during that daytime, wouldn't it have been? So, prior to SafeStart, the typical thing that we did in the industry to point out towards human error is we came up with these slogans and posters in our safety campaigns. And these slogans were such things as, safety is no accident, safety means 0 accidents, stop accidents before they stop you. And then what we did is we took these same kind of slogans and we put them all over the place. We put them on the side of our buildings. How many people have seen that in their lifetime? Or we had these safety campaigns where we handed out t-shirts to people so they'd be completely aware. And as you can see from this picture, the guy got the t-shirt, but he didn't get the helmet, did he? So they weren't very effective. So what we want you to do now is take this SafeStart card out of the back of your folders, and we're going to show you a couple of videos. And what we'd like you to do while you're watching those videos is kind of, see if you can't pick out what critical errors the people in the videos are making. So, in this first video here, what I'd like you to look at is, first of all, see what kind of critical errors this person makes and the one at the back, and after we're done with the video, we'll discuss that. So, anybody out there, can you tell me what critical errors this person made? Okay, Bob, so what do you think? Yeah, I would agree. Definitely his eyes were on the task. He turns his head, and I would agree probably his mind wasn't on the task either. He's probably thinking about, talking to his boss, impressing with his readiness, And he certainly steps in the line of fire when he walks in that filing cabinet, doesn't he? So, anybody out there can kind of give me an indication what the second guy was doing? Okay, Mary, so what's your thought? Yeah, I would say he definitely has a slip issue, doesn't he? He puts his hand on the table, slips and falls, and once again, there could be a chance that his mind's not on the task. He's thinking about, you know, this presentation with his boss. He might be a little bit apprehensive about the whole situation, right? So, we're now going to show you a second video, which is really a good example of two things. One is people stepping the line of fire, and also people without their mind on the task. So, we can see from these first couple of videos that these errors that we make are quite common. And in fact, I think we could probably argue that not only are these things common, they're very predictable. In a lot of cases, what we can do, we can actually set people up to make these mistakes. And that's what these next couple videos are about. So, and just to even things up. So, what we have to realize is that not all errors cause injuries. In fact, normally what happens with an error is we do one to three things, or all three of them at once. We basically waste time, we waste money, and we cause ourselves to be embarrassed. So here's an example of that. So the other thing we need to realize is that oftentimes we don't increase the risk for ourselves when we make an error, we actually increase the risk for others. So here's an example of that. So what we need to start doing now is thinking about how many mistakes we've made in our lifetime. So if you think about now, between so far in your life and probably, you know, how many more mistakes you'll make before your life is over, I mean, what do you think it might be? 500,000, 1,000,000 mistakes? It'll probably certainly be significant. And the trouble is, if there's enough hazardous energy, it can really put a crimp in your day, can't it? So what we'd like you to do now is watch this video and consider a few things. First of all, what would you do if this was in your work environment? What would you do to keep it from reoccurring? And second of all, is this hazard free for the look-in? So take a look and see what you think. So for a little background on this before we consider that, is this lady here, she's actually the owner of this bar, and she's owned this bar for 20 years. So can somebody in the audience kind of give me an idea what they think you could do to prevent this from reoccurring? Okay, Harry? Yeah, I would agree with that. We probably could, you know, design some kind of a buzzer beeper system so when that door is open, people are aware of it. And the other thing, like somebody else had mentioned, is, you know, we could certainly probably fix something with the door hatch so there was, you know, chains that prevented people from falling down, or guards. And maybe you could take some of those orange cones and put them up around them like the telephone company trucks do. But now let me have you consider something here. Here's a lady who's on this bar for 20 years, and she knows all about that hatch. If she had just basically, before she moved, had looked down, do you think she would have fallen down the hole? No, she wouldn't have. So I guess the next question to pose is it realistic to think that we can take every situation in our work environment or in the world, and we can re-engineer it or change it so people who aren't paying attention aren't going to get hurt? I mean, if you think about every intersection in North America, is it realistic to think that we could re-engineer them so people who aren't paying attention would not have to worry about getting hurt? No, it's not a realistic expectation, is it? So this next video, what I'd like you to do is, you're not going to be able to tell everybody who's not paying attention, but see if you can't pick out the obvious ones in here who obviously weren't paying attention. So, how many people in this video weren't paying attention? Fred? Yeah, I would agree. There's three people. There was the two car drivers, the one who crossed the intersection, the one who came through, and the pedestrian. So now my next question to you, by a show of hands, how many think that this pedestrian had a close call? He walked away from it, no injuries, nothing happened. Okay? How many people out there think that he ended up with just minor injuries? He had a couple of cuts, maybe a scrape or a bruise. Okay? Next, how many people think that he had a major injury? He had broken bones, head injury, you know, internal bleeding. And finally, how many people out there think that he died? Well, in reality, what happened is this guy was really lucky. He walked away from this injury to tell the story. He, however, did suffer some major injuries. He had a broken leg and he had a head injury. But the reality is, you know, he was a very lucky person. So what we'd like to go next into is kind of introducing you to these risk pyramids. Well, when we look at a risk pyramid, what it kind of looks at is we talk about the hazards, the unsafe acts, the unsafe conditions, and when one of those happens, what normally then there's one of 4 categories you can end up in. So, kind of for an example, a hazard is the driver doesn't see the red light. So, if the other driver avoids the collision, well then you get what's called a close call or near miss. Nothing happens, nobody's injured. People's heart rate might increase because they're a little bit stressed, but that would be about it. Now, if the 2 cars collide and they've both been putting their brakes on, so they aren't moving very fast, well, there's not much hazardous energy. So there's a likelihood that now what we end up with is a minor injury. Somebody gets a cut or a scrape or a bruise. Now, say the 2 cars are moving faster and they have a major collision. Well, one that happens then is you have a major injury. You might end up with a broken leg, an internal bleeding, a head injury. And the worst or final one is if there's sufficient, a huge amount of hazardous energy, like a big semi-truck driving along hits a car, you end up with a fatality for 1 or multiple people. But see, the trouble with these risk pyramids is what they tend to infer is that if you're exposed to enough hazards, eventually you end up here at the fatal category, don't you? But the reality is that we've all been in we've all been around many hazards in our lifetime, and from the looks of it, we're all still alive in this room, so there must be some other factors that come into play. So what we want to look at next then is this kind of accident pyramid kind of type, no, not pyramid, but domino kind of scenario. So what happens is you get enough situations line up, enough events happen, and some unexpected event comes along that triggers this kind of domino effect, and what it causes is an accident or an injury. So what we kind of come up with is for that scenario to actually happen, you have to have 3 things. First of all, as we discussed, you have to have some hazardous energy, and enough energy to actually cause an injury when there's an involvement. The second thing is you need a person. If there is no person and you have a lot of hazardous energy, nothing's going to happen, is it? And then the third thing is you have to have some unexpected event that triggers the whole thing to make it happen at the end that somebody has an accident or injury. So if you kind of look at where most of industry has focused their attention over the years, it's on the hazardous energy category, isn't it? What we do is we look at a situation where there's hazardous energy, and we either try and remove it, we try and re-engineer it, we try and contain it, or we try and put basically barriers around it to keep that from affecting people. And so that's what we've done in our work environments. We've tried to identify the hazardous energy, and then we've tried to take one of those 4 methods to remove it. But the reality is we can't always remove all the hazardous energy, can we? So when you finally get in a situation like the highway, where you can't contain all the hazardous energy or remove it, then what we do is we move on to other ways to mitigate the risk. And typically what that involves is putting on some kind of personal protective equipment. So in the construction industry, what we would normally do is you'd put on some kind of a fall restraint device if you're working up high. You're going to put on safety hats or hard hats. You might wear safety goggles to keep material from getting in your eye. And in the auto industry, what happened in probably the early 60s, early 70s sometime, was we came up with seat belts. And then later on we came up with airbags. And so if you statistically look at what if a person wears a seat belt, it cuts the fatalities on the road by 50% or more, which is good. But what you start to realize is that only one seat belt does that. There's this kind of really big bang for your buck that you get when you put protective equipment on people. But if you add a second seat belt, you don't cut that fatality rate by another 50%. So what do you do in a situation like this where you can't engineer out gravity? Well, what do? We put fall restraint harnesses on people. So if they do fall or slip, we limit the potential of them getting hurt. So we fully expect that in your workplace you're already doing what you can to either reduce the hazardous energy, or you're equipping your employees with personal protective gear to limit the risk, and we know you're giving them sufficient training to try about the hazards that are in their industry. So, but we also want to impress upon the fact that you don't put too much eggs in one basket as far as what that specific hazardous energy in your industry has to do with the amount of injuries that you actually get. So case in point is here is a major municipality that had over 1,000 firefighters. And what they did is they collected data on injuries over a period of time, and then looked at were they directly related to the hazardous energy, which in this case is firefighting related, or were there other categories of injuries? And what they showed was that only 4% of the injuries were directly related to firefighting. The other 96 were non-fire related. So that's a pretty powerful statistic to say that, if all we do is focus in on just the hazardous energy within our industry, we're probably going to miss quite a few of the other potential situations. And in fact, if you look at the top 4 injuries in all industrial workplaces, it falls into these 4 categories: slips, trips and falls, cuts, contusions and abrasions, sprains and strains, and back injuries. Now, these will vary in what order they are depending on what industry you're in. But having said that, what we start to realize is that if we get away from just looking at the hazardous energy, and that's really not what we're all about. There's really only 2 other things that can lead to injuries and accidents, and that's either the person or the unexpected. So what we want to look at further is the unexpected. So what we've identified is primarily 3 sources of unexpected. So the first one would be the self category. Now, most of us would never go out and intentionally hurt ourselves, so what that implies is that when we get hurt because of ourself, it's because we've either made a misjudgment, a miscalculation, or an error. And that's caused us to actually have an accident or an incident. Now, the second category would be other people. Now, if you don't look at contact sports and you don't look at military action where people probably are intentionally trying to hurt you, I think most of us would agree that the people you work with are not intentionally trying to hurt you. So once again, that kind of boils down to that people have either made a miscalculation, a misjudgment, or an error that has actually caused an injury. So then the third and final category would be some type of equipment failure. In your car, your brakes fail, and so when you go to put them on, you crash. Or machinery has a rope or maybe a high-pressure hose burst and causes an accident. So what we want to look at next, we're going to look at a video that kind of shows maybe what an equipment failure might look like. So if you look at these areas, and most people would pretty much agree that's that's the 3 areas. We sometimes get people saying, well, what about people who work around animals? Well, it looked like it hurt, didn't it? So the only other source of unexpected would be weather or acts of God type things. So we're looking at floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, which are pretty rare. I mean, just for a show of hands out there, has anybody in this crowd ever had an act of God cause them an injury? So there's nobody out there. I mean, it's rare to see more than one person ever raise their hand in a forum like this. So the thing, I think we can all pretty well agree that these are the 3 categories of unexpected. Now, where we tend to get the disagreement is when we try and put a number to these, whether it's 20%, 90%, 80%. So what I'd kind of like us to do now as we investigate this a little bit further is we want you to break up into some basic kind of study groups. And so the way we'll do that is if the people here in this front table can turn around and face the table behind you and do the same over here, and then we'll skip a row, and then if these people can turn around, what we'll end up with at the end of that is we'll have a bunch of probably about 20 or 25 small work groups of somewhere between 8 and 10 people in each one. So then what we'd like you to do is turn to page 13 in your workbook, and you'll find this same thing in there. And we'd like you to add in here what you think the percentage of these different categories. And then when you're done with that, then if you could spend maybe 5 minutes, introduce yourself to the people at your table, and then just have a little bit of a round table discussion about why you thought these were the different categories. And when we get done with that, we'll kind of go into this further. So what we sort of like to start looking at a little bit more is the personal risk pyramid. And so one of the problems we had prior to 1991 was there wasn't a whole lot of reliable data on how people got hurt. I mean, kind of an example is you would hear about a single person fatality on the highway. They drive up and they find this car wrapped around a tree. So, somebody would say, well, why did that person die? Well, the reality is we don't know if the person fell asleep. We don't know if an animal ran in front of them they were trying to avoid and they hit the tree. Was there a spot of black ice that by the next day it was gone, you couldn't tell? So we really couldn't tell what the cause of that fatality was. And another reason to look at these risk pyramids is when we start going through these different categories, you're going to start to assign different parts to what the unexpected was. It's going to give you a better idea whether it was self, it was by some other person, or it was an equipment failure. So in order to basically create a decent risk pyramid, the best place to find out what the source of the injury is to go back to ourself. We're the root of the information. We know our history of injuries, so we can actually construct our own pyramid. And then the thought is, if you construct enough periods over time, you can start to get an idea what is actually causing the different injuries throughout life, basically. So the first category we want to consider is the major category, and that's major injuries that we've had. It could be things like breaks in your bone breaks, torn ligaments, dislocations, concussions, third-degree burns. Very serious things can happen to you. And so, just kind of for a show of hands out there, how many people think in their lifetime they've had 1 to 5? How many people would it be 6 to 9? And how many people would it be 10 plus? Okay, so we move down to the next category, the minor injury category. And this is the stitches, strains, and sprains type thing. Now, when we were talking in the major category, let me ask you a question. If at some point in time you broke your leg, say in your shin area, what do you think the likelihood of that happening a second time in your lifetime? It's pretty slim, isn't it? It's not really going to happen very much. But when we start to consider minor injuries, let's kind of with a show of hands out there, how many people have ever had a back spasm? And of those people who put their hand up, how many people have had more than one back spasm? Okay, so how long did it take you and how many back spasms did you have to have before you decided that you had to change the way you lift things? Not many, did it? And what motivated you to do that? It was pain. It was the pain in the back, wasn't it? So think about this. Who actually got you to change your behavior? Was it your boss? No, it was you. You did it because you were motivated by the fact that it was painful. So I suspect that most of you who've changed your behavior, you now do it unconsciously. You don't think about it. So what you did is you're experiencing pain, and that motivated you to basically make a change in your behavior in life, didn't it? So once again, kind of a show of hands, how many people think that their minor injuries are less than 5? 5 to 11? 11 to 14? 14 plus. Okay, so what we can actually see is that we look at these first two categories, major and minor, we've all had some experience with being hurt, haven't we? So then let's move down to the next category, cuts, bruises, and scrapes. Well, I mean, how many do you think you've had in your lifetime? I mean, it's probably more than you can count. But I'm sure a lot of you are probably thinking, well, what's the big deal? It's not like it's going to cause me to die. Well, you're absolutely right, it's not. But think about this again. I mean, how many people out there who ever slammed their finger in the door? Okay, it hurt, didn't it? It hurt really bad. I know when I did it hurt a lot. So the reality is that you slammed your finger in the door, but you weren't intentionally trying to do that. And in fact, all these minor little injuries, the cuts and bruises and scrapes, were all, they all happen because something in your defense system that you use to keep yourself safe, it slipped through, didn't it? So, the one thing that happens is when we start asking these questions, most of us think, we're just thinking about our adult life. But let me ask a question: how many people out there have either children or grandchildren who are probably 10 and under? Okay, so how many times a week do you think they get hurt? Okay, I think probably some of you are probably thinking, what do you mean how many times a week? How many times a day does it happen? And how about you that have grandchildren or little children under 2 years old? I suspect a lot of you probably think, I mean, some of these kids get hurt by the hour, don't they? It seems like it never ends when you have little kids. So what we need to do, we need to start thinking more about these incidents through the lens of our entire life. And so, what we start to realize is even though these are cuts and, minor cuts, bruises, and scrapes, it doesn't mean that they're completely all minor. I mean, look at this. If this would have happened a couple inches down, whatever he hit his head on, he might have lost his sight. And they still do leave marks, don't they? I mean, deep bruises, blood. I guess she probably broke her leg even though she's cutting up like that. And I mean, this looks like one of my family portraits when my kids were that age. I've got 3 boys, and these aren't my children, but I can certainly relate to legs that look like that. So what we start to look at is if you look at this is a 3-year-old child. I think it's a picture of one of Larry's children when he was 3 and he was learning to ride a skateboard. And if you look at this boy's legs, he's probably got, you could count probably 14, 15 visible cuts, bruises, or scrapes, can't you? And what we start to realize is that the typical child of that age experiences somewhere between 15 and 25 cuts, bruises, or scrapes every week of his life, okay? So If we want to do a little bit of quick math to kind of figure out how many cuts, bruises, and scrapes we might experience in our lifetime, let's just take that typical 10-year under child who's getting 20 cuts, bruises, or scrapes in a week. And if we say there's, just for easy math, that there's 50 weeks in the year, in 10 years, what we arrive at is that the typical child has probably had 5,000 to 10,000 cuts, bruises, or scrapes before they even reach the age of 16. Well, that's a lot, isn't it? So what happens as we move into adulthood is we tend to get these kind of, single injuries. In this case, here's a person, he's dropped a concrete block on his leg. He cut the leg, you can see he's got a scab, so it must have bled at one time and must have been, deep enough to create a scab. But if you look further, look at his legs. Do you see, other cuts, bruises, and scrapes? Or in this case, this individual's got a, it was probably, maybe a cut or just a deep scrape. But once again, you look at the rest of the leg, you don't see cuts, bruises, and scrapes all over the place. In fact, let me ask people out there, does anybody out there know that right now they have more than 1 or 2 visible cuts, bruises, or scrapes? Well, it's not very likely. Because what happens as adults, as we get older, we go from the 15 to 25 per week that we have as children to the point where it's typical to only have maybe 1 or 2 per month. So we start out with 5,000 to 10,000, in our lifetime before we're 16, and we get down to 1 or 2 per month. Well, that's a 5,000% improvement, isn't it? And so no wonder a lot of us think, well, I've improved that much, I'm pretty much safe already, aren't I? So the problem with that is that here we have the 3-year-old, and he's got these amount of cuts, bruises, and scrapes, but the reality is as he gets older, and as we all get older, we start to experience more and more hazardous energy. So here's a picture of his 7-year-old brother instead, who is learning to ride his 2-wheel bike. Well, you can see that he only has maybe 5 or 6, cuts or bruises or scrapes. But if you look at them, they're much more serious. They're much deeper because he's been involved in a lot more hazardous energy. And what about when we go on the highway? I mean, there's just hazardous energy all over the place, and at this point in time, we don't have the technology to get rid of it, do we? So when you look at this situation, you start to think, well, how many mistakes do I have to make before it's either very serious or it's over with? Well, the answer would be only 1. Probably. But then you think about it and you say, well, but I've made a lot of mistakes in my lifetime on the road. I mean, one of the mistakes that, we should all think about is just kind of a show of hands out there is how many people in the years they've been driving have either fallen asleep at the wheel or almost fallen asleep at the wheel. Well, it's pretty much looks like almost everybody out there, including myself. So when you start to think about that, I want you to look at this next video, and this person actually falls asleep at the wheel, and then he has his incident. So what I'd like you to think about is, when you're watching this, if you can count how long his eyes actually stay closed before he actually, has his crash. So, when we start to think about that, the incidents like that have happened to us, we start to come up with the next category, which is, close calls and near misses, which is what this guy had. He had a close call and near miss. And we've all had those. We've all, if we admit that we actually have fallen asleep at the wheel almost, and we didn't have an accident out of it, we woke up before that happened and we're still driving, that would be a close call or near miss. So now if I start to ask you, how many close calls or near misses have you had in your lifetime, we're probably, if somebody asked me that, I would probably start to think, well, I don't know, there's a lot of them out there. I would really have a hard time adding that up. So that would be really difficult to do. We'd have to search this, database of, in my case, 57 years. But if we rephrase the question differently, if we think about all the close calls and near misses that almost resulted in a fatality, now that's something we can all start to think about. And so now we can start to probably put a number on that and think what it might be. So let me pose the question to you again. How many people in the audience think they've had less than 10 in their lifetime? How about 10 to 14? How about 15 to 19? How about 20 plus? I can tell you a little story of a close call I had at one point in time in my life. This would have been probably back in 1994, and I was working for a company in British Columbia called Water Pure and Simple. And what myself and another guy I worked with, what we did is we designed water purification plants for a distributor network, and then we would go around the province installing these. And on a typical installation, what we would do is we would go to the site, we would work anywhere between 5 to 7 days straight, and typically we would work 12 to 16 hours a day. So we were putting in lots of hours, working really hard. And the one I remember most was we were in Abbotsford, British Columbia. We were installing a plant. We wrapped up after probably day 6, and once again we worked 12, 14, 16-hour days. It was about 6:30 at night, and we had to start another installation the next day up in Camos, or no, not Camos, but in Kelowna, British Columbia. And Steve and I both lived in Penticton, so we were leaving at 6:30, and our intent was to drive the 5 hours home to Penticton, through the mountains, get home, basically get a change of clothes, see our family, the next day come in early, load up all the stuff we needed for the next installation, and take off down the road. So it's wintertime in the Fraser Valley. We have this, heavy downpour of rain. It's probably 2 to 3 degrees above freezing. And we realized that once we enter the mountains between the Fraser Valley and Penticton, we probably have a 3-hour drive through what could potentially be severe weather conditions. Lots of snow, whiteout conditions. We thought, this is completely crazy. What we should do instead is we'll drive the road a couple hours, we'll get a hotel room, we'll get a good night's sleep, then we'll get up maybe early in the morning, get on the road by 6. We'll still be in Penticton by 9. We can load the van up, we can get a change of clothes, we can stop by and see our family and our kids, and then we can head up to Kelowna. And if we get up there by noon, we can still get an 8-hour day. So that's what we decided to do. So we get up the next morning, we get on the road, we get into the mountains, and it's an overcast day, but luckily the plows have been out, they scraped the roads pretty good, the road conditions aren't bad. And we get about 3 miles from the east gate of Manning Park, and at that point in time, the Similkameen River is running next to the highway, and the highway pretty much parallels it, and the highway runs pretty close to the river. So as we're entering this last stretch before the exit from the park, the sun comes out. It turns into this beautiful clear sky day, bluebird, and we can see all the new fallen snow. It's just absolutely gorgeous. We're kind of looking around. And as we come around the corner in this big 1-ton van that's full of all kinds of materials and supplies, well, Steve hits a patch of black ice. And next thing, the truck is basically turning sideways down the highway, and it's heading for the bank of the river to go drop over about a 15-foot drop into the river. At the last minute, Steve's trying to pull us back on the highway, and the truck turns to the back first, and we go over into the river, rear end of the truck first, and later on we realized that not only did we drop down the bank 10 or 15 feet into the river, but we also traveled down the bank probably another 20 feet, I guess, in the air. So the truck lands in the river, basically with the back end of the river and the front kind of on the shallows of the river itself. And Steve and I both basically just kind of, our heads go back against the high-rise seats in this van. And I realized pretty quickly that I thought I was going to die, and I realized that I'm completely okay. I look over to Steve and I say, well, are you okay? And he goes, yeah. And I look out the passenger window and I see this big cloud of gas going up the river to the east. And I looked at Steve and I said, well, I don't know. I said, I had this horrible taste in my mouth. It doesn't smell very good in here. I said, I don't think this is very safe. We should get out of this truck like right now. And so he climbs out the driver's side and steps up on the bank. I get out the passenger side and I basically step in the water up to here. And we scramble up the bank up to the top where the road is again. And looking down, we kind of assess the situation, and we start to realize really how fortunate, how lucky we've been. Here's the truck, basically, with the back end in the river. And we start to realize that if we'd gone in front first, the whole back of this truck is full of toolboxes that weigh 40, 50 pounds. There's big pumps back there. There's all kinds of installation material. And between the driver's compartment and the back, there's no steel safety cage. So if we had gone in forward, all those pumps, all those toolboxes would have flown forward, and more than likely would have hit us both in the head and either killed us or caused severe injuries. And the other thing we realized is that this cloud of gas that we saw, what it was is when the truck went in backwards, we actually punctured the propane tank underwater, and what we were seeing was a gas of propane going up the river. Well, if we had gone in forward and we punctured the propane tank above ground, out of the water, more than likely we probably would have caused a spark, and either the truck would have either blown up or a huge fire, which probably would have killed both of us. So, we start to realize how very fortunate we are. And so, I think all of us will agree that when we start to look at our close calls and near misses, that we're very fortunate that it didn't elevate to another level, but possibly not quite as fortunate, as lucky as these people. So now, if we could take some of these close calls and near misses and replace a lot of that luck with skill, I think we could pretty well argue we'd be much better off. So, if you kind of remember when we went back, we looked at the kids, and they have 15 to 25 of these a week, and by the time we're an adult, we're down to 1 or 2 per month. Well, we start to say, well, why is that? Well, the reason is because as we age and get older, we start to get certain skills that we develop. And probably the two most important ones, even though they seem like common sense, are what we would call eyes on task and mind on task. And if you look at the typical little kid, they're kind of, in the moment, they're wandering around, really not paying attention to what they're doing, which is why they tend to bang into things and fall off things and get cuts and scrapes. But as we get older, we start to become much more aware of what we're doing. So we're looking at what we're doing, and we're thinking about what we're doing. Well, the net result of that is we reduce the amount of accidents and injuries that we have as we get older. So if you start to realize that safety is a skill, and we all know that you can teach skills, and the best thing about a skill is the more you practice it, the better you get at it. What that says is that we can learn safety techniques that will basically improve the chances of us not getting injured. And then if you start to consider the number of hazards you negotiate every day, especially if you go on the highway, it's probably the number of thousands, we start to realize that we do need a certain amount of skills. But I would beg to say that we probably don't encounter as many hazards as these people would in a day. So if you kind of assemble this personal risk pyramid based on 150,000 people in 40 countries, here's sort of what you come up with. You come up with 3 to 7 major injuries, somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 12 minor injuries. You're going to have 5 to 10,000 cuts, bruises, and scrapes, and 20 plus close calls or near misses. Now, these 5 to 10,000 start out before you're 16, and this is before we've actually gone to work for anybody or had any safety training, or the biggest safety training we've ever had would be, watch what you're doing, be careful, you shouldn't be doing that. But what we have to realize is that, of these close calls and near misses, some of these actually do turn into fatalities. And unfortunately for children, that accounts to almost 8,000 per year in North America. That's the leading cause of death from people in the age categories of 1 to 44. It's more potential years lost than heart attack, stroke, diabetes, HIV/AIDS, and cancer combined. And if you want to make that a really sobering statistic, that's an average of 1 child per hour every day of the week, 365 days of the year, which is, not good. So, if you only think about the serious major injuries you've ever had in your lifetime, and you start to look at the sources of unexpected, let me see by a show of hands how many people out there have had a serious injury that was due to an equipment failure. Okay, I see 2 people, and remember there's about 100 to 120 of us in this room. Okay, how many people out there with a show of hands had a serious injury due to other people? Okay, I see about maybe 8 to 10 more hands. So what's that saying is for this group that only the serious injuries we're talking about in your lifetime are due to over 90% of them are due to self-inflicted type things because of errors that we've made in our situation. So if you go back to this personal risk pyramid, and if what's really humbling is if you start to think of all the cuts and bruises and the close calls and near misses that all the times you fell off your bicycle when you were 16, or all this dumb things you did in high school, and you start to think about all the little minor things that you do in life, banging your shin, stubbing your toe, straining your back, and you start to look at the sources of the unexpected, what you really find out is that 97 to 99% of those injuries are due to self-inflicted things because you made an error on your own self. So let me think about this another way. Think about all your serious injuries in life, all the major ones you've had. Can you think of a time when your eyes were on task, your mind was on task, you were aware of the line of fire, and you were aware of the balance, traction, and grip issues, and you got injured? No, you probably can't, because when you don't make one of those 4 critical errors, it's not very likely you're going to get injured, are you? Okay? So what that means is there's some other factor that's causing us to make those errors. So we want to investigate that a little bit in more detail. So what we'd like you to do at this point in time is take out your workbooks, turn to page 39 through 59, and actually go through the workbook. Now this is going to take about 45 minutes, and what you're going to find is that this workbook is in a question and answer kind of format. Now, this isn't a test. The reason it's question and answer is what we found is that by doing a question and answer format, you retain more information than if you're just basically reading through it, because otherwise you tend to skim. So, once again, this isn't a test. So what you do is you fill out, you read the question, you fill out your answer, and if you turn to the back of that same page, you'll find that the answers are highlighted there, or checked in for you. So then what you can do is you can compare your answers, and so what you might say is, well, what if my answers are different? I don't agree with it. Well, the reality is a lot of these answers are kind of what the general consensus of what people said. The other thing is it could be possible that it's a story that somebody's told, and that specific person is how they answered it. Now, if yours don't agree, you know, don't get concerned about it, because in a lot of cases there is, you know, kind of gray areas that might be just as equally as true. So if you happen to get done with this a little bit early, go ahead and, you know, get yourself a refreshment. You know, use the washrooms if you need to, and then make sure you're back in here in about 45 minutes, and we'll discuss this a little bit further. So when we went through the book, we spent a lot of time on these 4 states: rushing, frustration, fatigue, and complacency. And what we started to realize is that even though you're not intentionally forcing yourself to get in these situations, when you do, it can actually cause the chance of more risk and more chance of an injury. So I think what we should do is maybe review these states a little bit so we're all clear on this. So the first one would be rushing. And well, the way we define rushing is going faster than you used to, or than what you have the habit strength for. So I would, you know, contend that this NASCAR driver who drives 200 miles an hour plus on a daily basis, that's his job, he wouldn't find going 200 miles an hour as being a rush situation, would he? Or rushing. But if you were to put me in this car, or one of us, and told us to go 200 miles an hour, I think we would probably define that as rushing. We'd probably be pretty uncomfortable with the situation. The second thing that can define rushing is doing too many tasks at once, the famous multitasking that we all seem to do more and more nowadays. And part of the reason that multitasking, or doing too many tasks, that leads to injuries and incidents is because you're doing so many things that you can't keep either your eyes on the task or your mind on the task, and so that increases your risk of being injured. Now, the next thing we talk about is frustration. And I think we'll all admit that when we get really frustrated, we almost go on autopilot. We're no longer thinking. We're just kind of like robots reacting to a situation. So in this video, you're going to see this guy get frustrated. And it's actually quite funny, but you know, what's a little bit scary is that this guy actually probably at the end is so frustrated and he's lost his temper that he starts trying to kick this CRT. And if any of you have ever seen one of those explode, it's a pretty frightening situation. So, you know, what I'm trying to say is in a normal situation, if you weren't frustrated, you would never think about kicking a CRT. But this guy has moved to the next level where he's just kind of out of it. So check it out, and you know, it's pretty funny actually. So this final one we're going to look at is based on fatigue. And you're going to see this guy who's been riding a long way on his bicycle in some kind of a bicycle race. And he's going to attempt to do something at the end before he crosses the finish line that I suspect he's been doing since he's probably been 5 or 6 years old. But because of his fatigue, he's not actually able to pull it off. So, you know, what happens? You know, he falls, he probably got some bruises. Probably worst case, he's probably actually bruised his ego, hasn't he? But the thing that I found interesting about this video clip also is after his fall, he now goes into a rushing state. He's rushing to get back on his bike and actually go across the finish line, isn't he? And he almost causes an incident by hitting the other bicyclist. So we almost had actually two states, you know, that actually caused almost 2 incidents in this video right here. So moving forward, there's going to be 5 units of SafeStart, and this is going to be the basic plan for all 5. What we're going to do is the presenter or commentator is going to open with some opening comments. We're going to show you a first video clip. Then we're going to go on the workbook exercise like we did, which are generally 40 to 45 minutes. We're going to show you a second video clip, and then we're going to break up into our group and table discussions and talk about some of the information. Now, the thing that those help to do is that we all start to realize that, you know, these events and things that happen to us, we're not, you know, we're happening to all of us. So we start to see that it's kind of a shared experience. We all have these incidents and events that can happen in our lives. And then the final thing we'll do is make some closing comments and what we'd like you to practice for the next session. This generally takes somewhere between an hour and a half to 2 hours, and then that's the end of it, basically. So what we're going to look at here in this video clip is this is Larry Wilson, who I told you about before, who's the principal author of SafeStart. And what he's going to do, he's going to explain to you what the 4 elements of a good SafeStart story are, and how to assemble one and put one of these together, and what the importance is to the SafeStart training program of the SafeStart story. And then what we're going to do after that is we're going to actually look at two real SafeStart stories. One is from a man named James Ent, who's actually a professional stuntman, and the second one will be Larry Wilson himself telling you his SafeStart story. And what we'll do is, while we're watching these stories, is we'd like you to turn to page 60 in your workbook, and you'll find this SafeStart story worksheet. So what we'd like you to do to start with right away is put down the name of the storyteller, James Ent and Larry Wilson in there. And then as you watch the story, we'd like you to fill this out. And so the first thing we'd like you to do at the end of the story is put together kind of a summary of what actually happened in the story. And the second thing we want you to do is look through and check off, did we have the actual 4 elements that makes a good SafeStart story? Did the story presenter tell what happened? Did he tell you what the state or states that they were in? Did he mention what the critical errors were? And also, did they tell you what the injury was or the close call and how it could have been worse? And then the last thing we want you to do is actually fill in the states and errors that you think the individual was either in or made. So I'm going to start this now. Larry's going to basically give you the introduction to the SafeStart story, and then he'll go right into the James Ent story.
Okay, now that you're done.
So, can someone out there kind of give me a summary of what happened in James Ent? Harriet? Yeah, you're right. Basically, James is using a table saw and he cut his finger off, didn't he? So, did this story have the 4 elements? Did we find out what happened, what the activity was? We sure did. What states or states was he in? Yeah, he told us that, didn't he? Critical errors, we got that also. And what the injury was, or the close call, and how it could have been worse. Yeah, James included all 4 of those in his story, didn't he? So, somebody out there, Doug, can you tell me what states that James was in when this accident happened to him? Exactly, he was complacent, wasn't he? And now let's see, can somebody else, Monty, can you tell me what the errors that James made? Yeah, you're right. His mind wasn't on task. He got himself in the line of fire, and he lost his grip, and that's what actually caused his finger to go on the blade, didn't it? So now we're going to look at the next clip, which is actually Larry Wilson's SafeStart story.
I'm Larry Wilson.
So, can someone out there say Fred? Once again, Fred, you're good at answering questions. I thank you for that. Can you give me a summary of what you think happened with Larry in his story? Yeah, you're right. Basically, Larry got a cut above his eye, and he blackened his eye when he was up, traveling around his hotel room in the middle of the night in the dark, didn't he? So, did Larry have the 4 elements of a good SafeStart story? Yeah, he certainly did. I mean, we would expect that. He's the author and the guy who put this together, so we would expect he'd know how to tell a good SafeStart story, wouldn't we? As far as what states was Larry in? Matilda, what do you think? Yeah, you're right. Basically, he was fatigued, it was late at night, and he was complacent. He didn't want to turn the lights on. He didn't want, he didn't really want to wake up, did he? He just wanted to get in the bathroom and take care of what his needs were. And can someone out there basically tell me what errors he made? Mark. Yeah, he made them all, didn't he? He didn't have his eyes on the task, didn't have his mind on the task, he got in the line of fire, and he basically lost his balance and his grip, didn't he? He tripped over the shoe, and then he hit that shirt and basically slipped across and ended up banging his eye. So what's going to follow next is Larry's going to give us kind of a wrap-up, and then we'll move on forward.
Okay, so like I said before, sometimes... Okay,
So really what the rest of the presentation we're going to make for all these 5 units is we're going to do basically more details, more practice, more examples of the 4 states: rushing, frustration, complacency, and fatigue. And we're going to show how those states cause us to make the errors of eyes not on task, mind not on task, stepping in the line of fire, and balance, traction, and grip issues, which can lead from a less risky situation to elevate to a more risky situation where an incident or accident can happen. So, in Unit 2, which Mary Thompson's going to give us after this presentation, after our 15-minute break, and she's going to go into more detail on eyes on task, mind on task. And the reason those 2 critical errors are so important is because often they lead us to make the next critical errors of either getting the line of fire or a balance and traction grip issue. Then in Unit 4, we'll move on to more detail about the 4 states: rushing, frustration, fatigue, and complacency, which often do lead us to make these critical errors. Now, if all we did in this program was to tell you about, states and errors, and didn't give any tools to actually do something about that to prevent these accidents, it really wouldn't be very worthwhile. So that's what Unit 5 is all about. We introduce you in specifics to what we call the critical error reduction techniques. And what these are techniques that when you get into a state, it prevents you from making a critical error, which can often elevate you to a risky or dangerous situation that can result in an injury. So we'll go over those in a lot of detail. And the thing with the CERTs, or critical error reduction techniques, these techniques need to become almost second nature, so we can deal with them very quickly in real time in situations where things are unfolding probably quicker than a lot of times we can even be aware of. And then the second thing we'll do is we're going to introduce you in detail about how you take the SafeStart methods home to your family. So what we'd like you to do tonight as you go home is in the back of your folder you'll find this critical error reduction technique card. And what we would like you to do is on your way home tonight, and Larry described it in part of his video, is we'd like you to fill this out. We'd like you to start looking at these error risk patterns on your way home. And so what we want you to do is when you see one, is basically fill out who made the mistake. Was it a family member, a friend, or a stranger? And then we'd like you to tell us where you saw it. Did you see it on the road, on the home? Did you see it on TV? And then if you can, go ahead and basically see if you can't fill in the states and errors that you see. Were they rushing? Were they fatigued? Did they take their eyes off the task, mind not on task? And then what we like you to do is, come back and we can discuss these tomorrow. But I think what you're going to see as you start to become more aware of these state to error patterns, you're going to start to see them everywhere. In fact, that's what I kind of told you about my son. When he came back and he jokingly said that SafeStart's ruined his life. That's what he was talking about. He now was seeing these different state to error patterns, and he was seeing them everywhere. And so in his just the 2 days training that he got, he became more aware of what effect they were having on his life. So kind of an example of some of the common state to error pattern you might have seen numerous times, and possibly you might even see them tonight on your way home, is we have a slow-moving truck in the right-hand lane of a 4-lane highway. And so what happens is, the traffic starts to slow down, and people start to move from the right lane to the left lane to get around it. And so what happens is traffic starts to back up, doesn't it? And then eventually what happens is you get a guy or a gal, whatever, and they get frustrated, they're in a hurry, and what do? They pull around the rest of the slow-moving people, they speed up, and then they cut back in, and they get around that truck, and they get down the road because they're in a hurry to get someplace, and they want to get home, or they want to get to work. And then eventually, you'll get a second person doing that, and maybe a third. So then what starts to happen? Well, the rest of the people start thinking, well, this isn't fair. I'm trying to get there just as much as they are. And they start to get frustrated with these guys who are rushing and pulling in front of them and seemingly getting ahead of them by quite a bit. So what do? They start to narrow the gap between the cars. And if you think about this, here's what's happening. You have drivers who are frustrated because somebody else is rushing. And what are they doing by narrowing that gap? They're putting themselves into the line of fire, aren't they? Because what would happen, say, if this guy's really close to here, and somebody up here slams on their brakes for some reason? What's going to happen? They're now so close, and they're moving so quickly, and they basically put themselves in the line of fire. What they've done is they've increased the likelihood that they're going to actually have an accident, aren't they? So, once again, these are common things you're going to see, and now that you have some of the tools, you're going to be able to identify both the error patterns and the things that cause them to happen. So, the other thing we wanted to point out is we talked about earlier in the fact that SafeStart is non-political. The other thing that SafeStart is it's non-judgmental. We don't care why you're rushing or why you're in a rushing state. What we want to do is give you tools to prevent that from happening when you are in that state, to prevent you from actually having an accident or an incident. So we start out by introducing SafeStart to you in the workplace, but we also realize that there's 20 times more fatalities outside the workplace. And so what we want to do is we want to actually make you also just as safe at home, in the community, and particularly on the highway where there's all this hazardous energy floating around. So what we've done is we've developed a 4-part DVD program called SafeStart Home. And what this is designed is basically for techniques to bring this program home to your family. So in the final session of SafeStart, you're going to learn more about the training, but we just want to kind of give you an overview of the different components. So the first component is a 3-part DVD called Taking SafeStart Home, and this is designed for the whole family. Now, the second DVD is a 5-part DVD called Heard at Home, and it's primarily designed for parents, grandparents, and babysitters who are the caregivers of young children. The third DVD is called SafeStart on the Road, and it's designed for young drivers, people in the 15 to probably 18-year-old category who are just starting to drive, and it's designed to either use by themselves, or we also encourage the parents to watch that with their child. And then the final DVD is one we call the Boo Boo Bandits. Now this DVD has been designed for children probably elementary school or younger, the preschool type kids. And the feedback we've gotten from both parents, grandparents, and educators who've shown this to particularly to preschool kids is that they love this DVD. I mean, they'll sit there and they'll watch this thing over and over again. I mean, if you let them watch it, 5, 10, 15 times a day, they will. And the thing that's interesting about this this thing is what we realize is that the concepts that we're training you here today about risk to error patterns and critical error reduction techniques, CERTs, are way above the head of a 5 or 6 or 7 or 8-year-old. But kids in that age, they actually can understand concepts like hard and sharp and hot and slippery. And they can also understand pretty quickly how a hard surface can result in them get an injury if their head hits it or their leg. So what we've done in this Boo Boo Bandits DVD is we've created these kind of over-the-top, really comical, fun characters: Ms. Hard, Miss Hot, Mr. Sharp, Mr. Slippery, and the Grand Boo Boo himself. And we put them into fun situations that the kids can start to get these concepts that if you aren't careful, you can actually have a mishap. Because what we're trying to prevent is situations like this. This is a picture of Larry's daughter when she was probably maybe 3 or 4 years old. And they had gone down to Vancouver for a weekend trip. And his little daughter at the time, she goes in the bathroom and she finds some of these little soap packets. And she comes out and she's really excited about them. And she comes back to Larry, her father, and she goes, can I keep these? Can I keep these? He goes, oh, sure, honey, you can keep those. And so she's excited about that. And she goes off to run off and tell her bigger sister that, they can keep these soap packets. And as she does, she runs off and she trips on the corner of the carpet and smashes her head into the corner of a coffee table, causing a fairly serious injury to her head. And so what the Boo Boo Bandits is designed to do is make kids start to become aware of the fact that there are things that can happen to them. They can trip over surfaces, they can hit their heads. And so it's kind of like a primary kind of use for telling kids about eyes on task, mind on task, and some of the things that can happen if they don't do that. So in this first video here, we're going to actually introduce you to the Boo Boo Bandits characters. And you'll kind of get to see how they're kind of over the top, and they have these kind of puns they throw out there and stuff. But they're really fun for the kids. So then the next video, what happens is the Boo Boo Bandits come and visit a 5-year-old boy who's having a birthday party, and they're going to try and ruin his birthday party. And then in the final video here, what happened was Larry took the Boo Boo Bandits DVD and he presented to some Girl Guides and Sparks. And after they watched the DVD, what he did, he handed them I think little flashlights or laser pointers, and he told them to go around the auditorium where they saw the presentation and see if they couldn't identify the different hard parts and the slippery parts and the hot and the slippery and the sharp. And what was really interesting was that when you see this video, that you realize that the kids really pick it up pretty quick. I mean, it's not very long before either individuals or groups are running around finding sharp edges or slippery spots in the floor. So it really shows how this video can really help little kids to start to become more safe. So I guess you might question, well, why are we at SafeStart making so much effort for kids? Well, the first answer to that is it's really the driving passion of the Wilson family and SafeStart is to reduce the amount of injuries and deaths that happen to children. And if you remember that one slide I showed you where 8,000 children in North America or 1 per hour die, well, we would love nothing better than to be able to change that slide every day, every hour, and eventually see that number going down. So that's kind of our goal. But the other reason that we put so much effort into training children is if you look at this learning pyramid, which kind of lays out the 7 methods of teaching people, of which you'll notice that we in SafeStart use all 7 methods. If you look at the teaching method that creates the most retention of knowledge, it's teaching others. Over 90% of what you learn, you retain. So if you go home and take this to your family and teach them, what it ultimately does, it makes you better trained at SafeStart, and that has 2 effects. One, it makes you a safer individual. It keeps your family safer, but the other effect that it has is it makes you a better employee. At work, you have a tendency to be safer, and you're going to help your coworkers be safer. And the other thing it can turn you into is almost like a SafeStart ambassador at where you work. It's going to help you bring this to your other employees and help the launch of SafeStart at your business to go quicker and more smooth. So we do, however, recommend that you do not present this to your family until you've gone through all 5 units. The reason being is you probably won't know the material well enough, and so it won't be presented to them very well. Like we said, during the last session, we'll give you additional information on each of the 4 components in the Take It Home program. So what we'd like to do is kind of do a little bit of a recap here of what we talked about this morning. So the first thing is this course isn't going to replace anything that you're currently doing in your safety or your safety programs at work. The SafeStart concepts can be applied anywhere and everywhere to reduce injuries. We can use it at work, we can use it at home, we can use it in our community, and we can use it on the road. And particularly on the road where there's high incidence of hazardous energy, it's critical that we try and use these techniques. Presently, over 2,000 companies in over 40 countries are presently using SafeStart, and it's been shown to reduce the average injury by over 50% or more. SafeStart is not about rules, it's not about procedures, it's not about discipline. SafeStart is non-political, and as we mentioned, it's also non-judgmental. We don't particularly care why you got in a rushing state. We just want to give you the tools and the methods to prevent you from getting an injury when you are in that state. It's available in over 25 languages, but primarily the only goal of SafeStart is to help each of us prevent the errors and mistakes we never wanted to make in the first place. So what happens almost every time we have one of these training sessions is either somebody from the general audience, or oftentimes it's somebody comes up to us afterwards and they say, well, you know, what about when people are drunk or they drink? I mean, does that have an effect on the errors we make and increasing the injuries? And the answer is absolutely it does. But what we have to realize about alcohol is it's totally preventable. It's totally by choice. So we'll discuss that in a little bit, but let's just watch some of these videos, and it's, you know, kind of comical to see what people do maybe when they drink a little bit, party a little bit too hard. So if we start to look back on the unintentional deaths in North America, and we see that on the road there's over 50,000 people who die per year, 25% of that's alcohol. Well, the reality about alcohol is it's something you can decide away. We could decide as a nation or a country or even the world that nobody was ever going to drink on the road again. And if we decided that away, 25% or over 12,000 of those accidents per year would go away. But the question is, what about the other 75% of the time, the other 75% of the accidents that happen that you can't decide away? You can't decide away rushing. You can't decide not to be frustrated. You can't decide not to be fatigued or complacent. It's just not possible to decide away those states that it eventually cause us to make those errors. So what we have to do is we have to give you tools that will help you when you fall in those situations to make sure that you don't make a critical error that can cause you to have an accident or injury. And so those are what we call our critical error reduction techniques, or CERTs. And so that's really the heart of the SafeStart program, is to train you to use these 4 CERTs and train you how to use them in real time, so it almost becomes second nature to you, so you're not thinking about them. Because what, you know, if you look at in real time when you're on the highway and you're going 60 miles per hour, that's the equivalent of 88 feet per second. So in the time it almost takes me to snap my fingers, you're going to move from where I am in the front of this at the front of this room to probably past the back of the room. I mean, that's pretty quick. And if you don't have these things down as kind of second nature, and you have to sit there and think about them for 2 or 3 seconds, in a lot of instances that we're in an everyday life, we don't have 2 or 3 seconds to think about that. So really what you're going to see between now and the next 4 units is we're going to give you technology or methodology to work on that. So that pretty much wraps up what my presentation is all about. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for being basically a really good audience and for your participation. I'm going to be here for the next couple of days with you as you go through this training, and I'll be doing some other sessions, but feel free when I'm not up here, if you want to catch me outside in the break room or whatever, you have questions or just things you want to talk about, I'd love to talk to you, and I hope you have a good couple of days. Thanks a lot.